My son Jonah stood at the microphone in the middle of his grand opening showcase. Lights bright, industry contacts watching, champagne barely touched, and told a room full of strangers that I had spent his entire life holding him back from becoming who he was meant to be. Not Stefan Wolfe, the man with the Toronto business cards and the expensive leather jacket who had been whispering promises in Jonah's ear for 6 months. Not the mounting invoices I didn't fully understand. Not the studio lease signed without my name but funded almost entirely by mine. Me, his mother. I had emptied savings, taken a part-time job after retirement, and used every dollar of Edwin's life insurance money. I had promised myself I would keep safe. And when I refused to put our Halifax home up as collateral for a second loan, my son looked at me across that beautiful, dimly lit room like I was his enemy. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I set my glass down on the nearest table, said nothing, and walked out into the November cold. The next morning, I stopped paying for everything. If you've ever loved someone so completely that you forgot to protect yourself, I hope you'll stay with me. I truly read every comment, and I'd love to know where you're watching from tonight. My husband Edwin used to say that Atlantic winters teach you who you really are. After 34 years in Halifax, I think he was right about that, and about most things. Edwin died from pancreatic cancer 18 months after his diagnosis, on a Tuesday morning in February, 3 years before any of this began. He was 61 years old. He died in our house, in the bedroom we'd shared since 1989, while snow fell quietly outside the window, and I held his hand and talked about nothing important just to fill the silence. Edwin had been a high school music teacher his entire career. He never wanted to be famous. He wanted to teach teenagers that a chord progression could say something words couldn't, and he did exactly that for 32 years at a school on the peninsula. Students came back to visit him years later. Some of them cried at his funeral. He wasn't a wealthy man. We owned our house outright. A narrow, pale blue 2-story on a street a few blocks from the waterfront, because we had been careful. Edwin drove his truck until the heat stopped working in winter. I bought my clothes at end-of-season sales. We took one vacation every 3 years, usually to Cape Breton to visit Edwin's sister. That was enough. It was more than enough. Before he died, Edwin made sure I would be stable. There was the house, a modest life insurance policy, his pension, and my own small pension from my years as a school librarian. I wasn't rich, but I was safe. That word, safe, meant everything after I watched him go. Jonah was our only child. He had Edwin's ear and my stubbornness, which made him both gifted and exhausting in equal measure. Edwin put a guitar in his hands when he was 5. By 12, Jonah was writing his own songs on loose-leaf paper. By 16, he was playing at small Halifax venues on Friday nights. Edwin used to sit in the back of those rooms with a coffee, watching. He never cheered loudly. He just smiled at me and said, "He got that from somewhere." I always answered, "Not from me." After Edwin died, Jonah and I grew closer in the fragile, careful way that grief sometimes allows. He came home more. He helped me clear out Edwin's woodshop in the basement without either of us talking much as about what we were doing. He planted the tomatoes that summer because he knew I wouldn't manage it alone. Then, about 1.5 years after the funeral, he came to my kitchen table with his laptop open, and something luminous in his expression I hadn't seen in a long time. "Mum," he said, "I want to open a recording studio." He showed me photographs of a commercial space in the north end of the city. Exposed brick, high ceilings, natural light. He had spreadsheets, rough ones, but they existed. He'd spoken to 2 local musicians who said they'd rent studio time. He'd done research. I sat across from him and watched his face while he talked. He looked alive. Not just hopeful. Alive in the specific way Edwin used to look when he described a student who had finally understood something. "What would you call it?" I asked. He smiled carefully, like he wasn't sure I'd take it well. "Blue Spruce Studio." Edwin had planted a blue spruce in our backyard the year Jonah was born. It was taller than our roofline now. "I didn't take it badly," I cried quietly, looking at the table, and then I told my son I believed him. Over the following months, I gave him more than I should have from the beginning. The lease deposit. First and last month's rent on the commercial space. Acoustic panels, recording equipment, a mixing board that cost more than our first car. I dipped into Edwin's insurance money twice, each time telling myself it was temporary. Jonah worked hard. I watched him work. He was at the studio, most days by 8 in the morning, staying until midnight. When I brought dinner by on weeknights, he always ate standing up over the console. He thanked me every time. Those early months, he never stopped thanking me. Then Stefan Wolfe arrived. The first time I met him, he was leaning against the doorframe of Blue Spruce Studio, wearing a black turtleneck and holding a flat white from a cafe downtown that charged $9 for coffee. He had a Toronto area code on his phone. He had the kind of easy confidence that doesn't bother asking permission to enter a room. "You must be Jonah's mum," he said, shaking my hand warmly. "He talks about you constantly." Jonah introduced him as a music industry consultant who had worked with independent artists across the country. "Stefan could help Blue Spruce build genuine connections," Jonah said. "Not local connections. National." I told myself that sounded promising. Within 6 weeks, the studio I had helped build began changing in ways that unsettled me. The acoustic panels Jonah had carefully selected based on weeks of research were replaced with more expensive ones, Stefan said. Would photograph better for press materials. The warm amber lighting Jonah originally chose was switched to something cooler and more contemporary. The studio rates were raised to a price point I quietly thought might price out exactly the local musicians who had agreed to book sessions in the first place. One afternoon, I stopped by with sandwiches and found 2 workers installing a custom reception desk that looked like it belonged in a Bay Street office building. "What happened to the old desk?" I asked. Jonah barely looked up from a contract he was reviewing. Stefan said it looked too homemade. I stood there for a moment. Edwin had built that desk. He'd spent a weekend in our basement sanding and staining it. Jonah had asked him to. It was the last large project Edwin completed before he got too weak to work with his hands. "It looked like your father made it," I said carefully. Jonah finally looked up. Something flickered across his face, guilt or something like it, and then it was gone. "We need to look professional, Mum." I nodded slowly. I left the sandwiches. I drove home and stood in the kitchen for 20 minutes without making tea. That feeling, that something had shifted without anyone announcing it, stayed with me from that day forward. Quiet and persistent, like a draft from a window you can't find. The money requests came more frequently after Stefan became a regular presence at the studio. Each one arrived with language I didn't fully understand. Artist advancement funding, industry positioning, market amplification, launch architecture. I asked Jonah, over dinner one night in late spring, how much we had spent in total. He paused before answering. Not long, just a moment, but that pause was the most frightening thing he had done in months. "Things are still scaling," he said. "That isn't what I asked." He pushed food around his plate. "Stefan says startups always look expensive before they become profitable." "What does Stefan say when he's not quoting Stefan?" Jonah's jaw tightened. "You've never given him a fair chance." I had, though. I had given Stefan Wolfe a very fair chance, right up until the evening I arrived at the studio early and found him alone at Jonah's computer, reviewing a document on the screen with his name across the header. When I asked about it, he closed the laptop smoothly and said it was a routine consulting proposal. His consulting company was called Wolfe & Associates Creative Strategy. I asked later how many associates it had. He smiled politely and said the structure was flexible. I began taking photographs of invoices with my phone when Jonah wasn't looking. The dinner Stefan arranged in September should have warned me more than it did. Held at a restaurant near the waterfront. Dim lighting, a prix fixe menu, wine priced beyond anything I would choose for myself. Jonah sat across from me. Stefan sat beside him, slightly closer to the head of the table than felt natural. A developer from out of town joined us, a man who said he was interested in music venue investment opportunities in the region. He shook my hand and said nothing more about himself for the rest of the evening. Near the end of dinner, Stefan slid a folder across the table to me. "Jonah's next phase needs a stronger foundation," he said. "The bank will approve an expansion bridge loan if there's additional security attached." I looked at the folder. I didn't open it. "What kind of security?" Stefan answered before Jonah could. Property collateral typically accelerates approval timelines significantly. Our house, Edwin's house. I looked at my son. He was looking at the table. I need time to read anything before I consider it, I said. Stefan's smile didn't move. Of course, we just want to keep momentum. The investor window doesn't stay open indefinitely. I took the folder home. I didn't sleep well. I spread its contents across the kitchen table after midnight and read every page twice. The following morning I called my friend, Maureen Tate, who had been an accountant before she retired, and who had been telling me for 3 months that I should let her look at the studio's finances. She came over that afternoon with reading glasses and a pot of her own tea, which she always brought because she found mine too weak. She sat at my kitchen table for 2 hours. When she finally took her glasses off, her expression said everything before her words did. Colleen, she said carefully, how much exactly have you given this studio? I told her the number. She was quiet for longer than Maureen ever usually managed to be quiet. Then she opened her laptop and started searching public business registration records. Wolfe & Associates Creative Strategy, registered in Ontario, sole proprietor, Stefan Wolfe. Operating for less than 3 years, no verifiable client history on public record. He's not a consultant, Maureen said flatly. He's a transaction. She explained it slowly, because she knew I needed slowly. Stefan's invoices were structured so that his fees increased in proportion to the studio's spending. The more Jonah spent on equipment, rebranding, press events, and industry access packages, the more Stefan earned. He didn't profit from Blue Spruce's success. He profited from its growth, whether or not that growth was sustainable. He benefits whether the studio makes money or not, I said. Yes, Maureen slid her laptop toward me. And look at this clause. There was language buried in a contract between the studio and Wolfe & Associates, language Jonah had apparently signed without fully reading, that granted Stefan's strategic advisory authority in the event of debt restructuring. If the studio enters serious debt, Maureen said quietly, he gets a seat at the decision-making table. I sat back slowly. Outside, November rain was beginning against the kitchen window. He's not helping Jonah build something, I said. Maureen folded her hands. He's waiting for it to become something he can take. The grand opening showcase was held on a Friday evening in early November. The studio had been beautifully staged. Soft lighting, a live 3-piece set, catered food, a guest list that included journalists and 2 Toronto-based label representatives Stefan had arranged. I wore a burgundy dress Edwin had always liked. I baked butter tarts. The one thing Jonah had always said was my best contribution to any gathering. I brought them in a tin his grandmother had left me. The room was stunning. I won't pretend otherwise. Whatever else Stefan had done, the space looked exactly like what Jonah had once imagined, if not exactly like what Edwin had helped build. Jonah greeted me near the entrance. He looked handsome and exhausted in equal measure. He kissed my cheek. He didn't mention the tarts. Stefan appeared within 3 minutes, handing Jonah a drink and steering him toward the label representatives with a hand at his back that looked collegial and felt, from where I stood, like direction. I spent the first hour talking to musicians I recognized from the local scene. They were warm. They didn't know the financial situation. They congratulated me on raising such a driven son. Then Stefan found me near the back of the room. The investors are very impressed, he said quietly. This would be the right moment to show you're committed to Jonah's future. He had the folder from the restaurant, the same one. He placed it on the table beside me without asking. I looked at it. I thought about Edwin's desk, which was gone. I thought about the blue spruce in our yard, which was still there. I thought about Maureen's voice saying he's waiting for it to become something he can take. I'm not signing anything tonight, I said. Stefan's expression didn't change dramatically, just a cooling, very slight, behind the eyes. He excused himself. 2 minutes later, Jonah was at my side. Mum, his voice was low and strained. Stefan says you won't sign. I said I wasn't signing tonight. There's a difference. There isn't, actually. The investors are here now, if you can't demonstrate. Jonah! I kept my voice even. Where is the money Stefan's company has been billing the studio actually going? He stopped. Have you reviewed the contract with Wolfe and Associates carefully? All of it? His jaw tightened. This isn't the time. Then find me a better time and I'll be there. Stefan had drifted back within range. He stood close enough that I knew he could hear us, not participating, just present. Keeping his hands clean. Jonah looked at me, and in his face I saw something that broke my heart, not because it was cruel, but because I recognized it. The look of someone who has tied their entire sense of worth to a particular outcome so completely that any obstacle to it feels like a personal attack. You've never believed this could actually work, he said. You've been waiting for it to fail since the beginning. The room had gotten quieter near us. People were noticing. That is not true, I said quietly. You treat every dollar like the whole thing is about to collapse. I treat your father's money like it matters. Something crossed his face then. Then Stefan said something low and quick near his ear, and whatever had momentarily softened in Jonah's expression closed back over. You know what? He said. Louder now, loud enough that heads turned. You've been holding me back my whole life, Mum, and everyone in this room sees it except you. I heard the words. I stood straight. I did not give the room what it was waiting for. I set down my glass. I picked up my coat from the chair by the door. I walked out into the cold Halifax night, and behind me the music started playing again. The next morning, I canceled every automatic transfer connected to Blue Spruce Studio. The lease support, the equipment loan installments, the monthly operational contribution I had been sending without receiving a single financial statement in return. Then I sat at the kitchen table and wrote a short email to Jonah. I rewrote it 4 times. I sent the version that said only what was true. I was not ending my relationship with my son. I was ending my signature on a blank check. I would not discuss it further until I had seen every invoice and every contract connected to Wolfe and Associates in full. He called 9 times that day. I answered on the 10th. He was not calm. He told me I was punishing him. He told me Stefan had warned him this might happen. He told me that payroll for the studio's part-time assistant was due next week, and I was leaving him with nothing. Not are you all right? Not can we talk, only the money. I told him I loved him, that I was not his enemy, and that I was going to forward him some documents Maureen had helped me compile. I sent the documents. He didn't respond for 4 days. On the 5th day, Jonah came to the house alone. He didn't have Stefan with him. He didn't have a folder. He stood on the porch in the early afternoon gray and asked if he could come in. I made tea, my tea, which was apparently too weak for Maureen, but had always been exactly what Jonah and I drank together on Sunday mornings when he was growing up. He sat at the kitchen table, and for a while neither of us said anything useful. Then he said, I went through the contracts. I waited. All of them. He rubbed one hand over his jaw. I didn't read them properly the first time. I let him walk me through the key points and I signed where he said to sign. I know. The percentage structure. He stopped, tried again. He makes more money when I spend more money, not when we succeed, when I spend. Yes. And that clause about advisory control during debt restructuring. Maureen found that one. Jonah looked at the table. His hands were still. I don't know how I missed it, he said quietly. You wanted to believe someone genuinely understood what you were trying to build. His eyes filled. He looked, for a moment, exactly as he had at 11 years old. That specific grief children carry when they discover the world doesn't hold the shape they trusted it to hold. I said terrible things to you in front of those people. You did. In front of people who had nothing to do with our family. Yes. He pressed his hands flat against the table. I don't know how to fix this. I thought about Edwin, who would have known exactly what to say and said it quietly, without any performance. I got up and went to the closet in the hallway. On the top shelf, behind winter scarves, was a flat cardboard box I hadn't opened since the week after the funeral. Inside were Edwin's composition notebooks, the ones he had filled over the years with chord progressions, partial lyrics, arrangements that never quite became finished songs. The last notebook was different. He had been writing something in those final months, something for 2 guitars, and he had left it 15 bars short of complete. He told me in the hospital that he wanted to finish it. He wanted something Jonah could play, something that would feel like a conversation between them even after one side of the conversation was gone. He ran out of time. I had kept it without knowing what else to do with it. I brought the notebook to the table. Jonah looked at it for a long moment without touching it. "He was writing that for you," I said. Jonah's hands trembled slightly when he finally picked it up. He read through it slowly. I watched his face the way Edwin used to watch him from the back of those small Halifax venues. Not cheering loudly, just present. "I can hear where it was going," Jonah said very quietly. "I thought you might." We sat in the kitchen while November light faded outside. After a while, Jonah got up and retrieved the acoustic guitar he had left in my front closet months ago, back when he'd still been coming for Sunday dinners. He played Edwin's 15 bars, then he kept playing. I don't know how long it took him to find the ending. Not long. Your father left enough behind for any patient person to follow. When Jonah finally lifted his hands from the strings, the kitchen was almost dark. "I'm sorry, Mum," he said. Just that. Not a speech, not an explanation. Just the truth, offered carefully by someone who understood the weight of it. I told him I believed him, and I did. Trust, I have learned, is not rebuilt in a single evening. It is rebuilt in the small, consistent things. Honesty, follow-through, showing up when it is inconvenient. Jonah has done all of those things in the month since. Stefan Wolfe eventually settled a civil dispute with 2 other studio clients in Ontario, quietly, without admitting to anything. The details came through Maureen, who still follows these things more closely than I do. I did not feel satisfied when I heard it. I felt tired, in the way you feel tired after carrying something heavy for too long and finally setting it down. Blue Spruce Studio is smaller now than Stefan's version of it. It is also, for the first time, sustainable. Jonah runs it himself. He raised his own equipment financing through a local credit union. He pays his part-time assistant on time. He asked me last month if I wanted to hear a session he'd recorded with a young songwriter from Dartmouth. And he played it for me in the studio on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. No guests, no industry contacts, just the 2 of us in the room his father never got to see. It sounded like something Edwin would have recognized. That is the only measure that has ever mattered to me. Some losses don't reverse. Some trust rebuilds so slowly it is almost indistinguishable from patience. Some wounds leave marks that don't disappear, and pretending otherwise would dishonor the people who carried them. But love, real love, makes room for all of it. The grief, the damage, the long and unglamorous work of beginning again. Not because the pain disappears, but because you choose each other anyway, after the truth finally comes out. Edwin knew that. He built it into the 15 bars he left behind. Jonah found the rest.